Hello everyone, it's been a while since I've installed this B-33, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about it because some things have changed since I first installed it. As you might expect, the first video I did on it was just a first impressions. So let's get into it. In this video I want to talk about the zeroing and see if it changed zero, but we'll get to that later. First off, let's cover a few things I noticed that I would recommend you do when you install yours. The first of which is the screws that go into the kind of legs or the arms here that attach it to the B10. So these right here, there's two of these on each side. What I wanted to mention about those is when I was installing it, I did not put Loctite on them. Zenitco recommends that you put Loctite on the top B33 screw, which is right here by the iron sight. You can see my scope is covering it a little bit, but it's just right there. Just kind of sits underneath where the iron sight goes, the rear sight blade. But yeah, they don't really mention having to Loctite these arm screws, so I didn't think they had to be. Turns out they did. What I noticed after a few months is I was cleaning my rifle and I heard like a weird shaking sound. So I was listening and I was able to figure out that it was these screws. They actually unthreaded themselves completely, and they were only held in thanks to the rail cover blocking them from falling out completely. So when you install yours, I would highly recommend Loctiting every single screw on there, not just the top screw, which Zenitco also recommends you do, or rather that's the only one they recommend you do. I don't remember them mentioning the other screws being Loctited, but you definitely should. I just used blue Loctite and so far it's held really solid. I had to do that a few months ago and so far it hasn't loosened up again, so would definitely recommend that on those 4 screws there. And the other thing I wanted to mention is just recently I've started having an issue for the past about a month now with the recoil spring. So right here, an issue I was having, I noticed every time I came home from the range, my recoil spring had somehow disassembled itself. So I would take it out and the end cap here would actually stay in the rifle. Somehow, I'm assuming it wasn't enough tension on it. That seems to be the most likely diagnosis. And so the end cap would just fall out in the bolt carrier and have to like tip it upside down to get it out. The rifle would still function fine, but it would be really annoying every time I went to actually reassemble it. So what I did is, I'm actually, one thing I want to mention is I'm not sure if this issue is related to the B-33 when I was installing it, because I was having a lot of issue with this spring when I installed it. So I think I may have damaged it because I was struggling a lot with it. There are some very good techniques on how to take apart and reassemble a recoil spring out there on YouTube. I'd highly recommend. There's a few short ones. Pretty much you take this front, there's 2 kind of rods in here. You take the front, well, you put the spring on and then you pull the front rod out and you kind of put it in a T shape and it holds everything in place. It's super great. There's tons of good videos on it on YouTube you can find. So if you know the technique behind the recoil spring, then it's really, really not hard at all. And as I mentioned, so I don't know if I messed up because I was kind of, I had a lot of trouble. If you go back to that original video on my original installation, my first impressions with the Zenitco B-33, I had a lot of trouble with the spring, so might be that. It might have just had wear because I did buy this rifle used, so it might have been the previous owner. I'm not sure in either case because it doesn't seem like they fired it very much. This was in more or less brand new condition when I got it. So that's something to consider though. As I said, I don't know if this is something that would happen in your rifles, but it's just something to keep in mind is try not to destroy your springs, It's pretty hard to destroy springs, but just don't like pull them apart. Don't bend them too much. Neither of which I really did much of, but I don't know, maybe it's just all the struggling at some point I accidentally did. So that's something to keep in mind. I replaced the recoil spring now, and so far everything's been working good. I've had it, I haven't been able to test it too much with this new recoil spring. I've had it on here for about 2 weeks now, so not super long. I've only fired probably about 100 rounds with it, with this new recoil spring. But yeah, so far it hasn't disassembled itself, so that is good. But that about does it for like the technical kind of installation recommendations I would have. So now moving on to if this thing holds zero. And yes, it does. I will go out to the range later in this video and we'll try it out and make sure it does hold zero. But I have had this on, and I've pretty much had this LPVO on. Actually, yeah, no, not even almost. I've had this on the entire time that I've had the B-33 on. I always shoot with this LPVO. And every time I clean it, I open up the the receiver cover, I take off the LPVO. So, and then I put it all back together, and it has all held up. I have not had any shift in the zero whatsoever. So let's go to the range, and I will test that out right now. I'm going to be firing a silhouette target at 100 yards. I'm using Barnall 60 grain hunting ammo, which is what I zeroed the scope for. So we'll just make sure everything's hitting where it should, more or less. I'm not using a bench because I'm not shooting for a precise group, just making sure that the B-33 itself didn't lose zero. So let's get started. I'm going to be shooting center mass. All right, so we're back from the range. Here is the target. This was at 100 yards, and I only hit 8 out of the 10. That is, well, that's not bad. That was actually completely my fault. But you can see, well, actually, maybe you can't see. This is a bit far from the camera, but all the rounds were shooting where I was aiming. I didn't have a very good position. My legs were a bit uncomfortable in that shooting position because of a lot of issues with how they constructed those tables at the shooting range I go to, but that's neither here nor there. Suffice to say, as you can see, it's all shooting dead center. It's a gigantic group. I'm not, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not really going for precision. I just wanted to make sure that it is shooting, you know, more or less in the center where I was aiming, and it is. So that is perfect. I've had this B-33, you know, I don't take it on and off completely because it's held in by those arms, but I have opened it up and closed it probably easily at least 100 times by now, whether I'm just like checking stuff on the internals or I'm actually cleaning it and disassembling it in that regard. And just before this video, when I got home, I cleaned the rifle, and yet again, I took it apart. So yeah, I've had it off and on a huge amount of times, and it hasn't had any shift in zero. Pretty much the only thing I would say is just make sure that you Loctite those screws. If I hadn't noticed that those arm screws had come loose when I did, it's potential, there was the potential that it may have ended up loosening up the entire receiver cover, and maybe it would have lost zero then. But as far as the unit itself, you know, if you install it correctly, it will not lose zero. And I still really like it. I would still highly recommend the B-33. It is quite good in my opinion. So that does it for this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any other questions about the B-33 or anything else, and I will be sure to answer them in the comments. So thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.